And we are live. This is Addy as Anakin Skywalker, YouTube's chosen one. Today is Thursday, May the 14th, and I am live here with Mark, the Grizzly Patriot. Mark is from Canada and runs his own show on YouTube. And I have been following Mark for a couple weeks now and checking out his videos. I discovered him recently. But Mark, for those that don't know, because there are definitely people in my viewership who don't know who you are, could you just give a rundown of who you are, what you do, and then where you're from in Canada too? Because I think people would like to know that as well.
Yeah, so I'm based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Just for the American viewers, straight north of Montana. And so I've been, I've been in sort of in deep as an activist, and I use that term sort of in a strange way because I'm politically I'm on the right, and generally speaking, folks on the right aren't generally activists. But I think it's important that we start to get active. So I dove into the whole political end of things probably a couple of years ago. I got involved with a political party in Canada called the People's Party of Canada. It's a new party. It's a nationalist populist party. And so when I sort of checked out of federal politics in Canada, really since the early 90s. We had a party called the Reform Party, which represented my values of, essentially of Canadian values and being more nationalist and worrying about Canada first, that kind of idea. So that party merged with our traditional establishment conservative party back in the 90s, and I sort of fell out of federal politics because at that point there was no home for me really. Of course, I kept my ear to the ground in politics, and I always watch what's happening. But there was never really a political outlet for me. So until this People's Party came about a couple of years ago, and I jumped on board. And then through that, I made a lot of contacts. And then, of course, in Canada, we had the Yellow Vest movement, and I dove in pretty heavily into that movement in Canada, and it was with that movement for a number of months. And then we did a mass protest convoy to Ottawa. It's the largest convoy Canada's ever seen, and we basically drove across the country and met on Parliament Hill in Ottawa to protest globalism. Essentially, one of the triggers, of course, was the carbon tax and the destruction of our energy industry. So that really was a trigger for that convoy. So we did that, and of course, I sort of became a bit of a name in the activist group across Canada, and then of course, further on with the People's Party of Canada, I ended up becoming a candidate, and I ran a campaign in the last election just this past October, and I started my YouTube channel around the same time that the People's Party started, and so I've been basically a YouTuber for a couple of years now, and my biggest thing, and I've sort of used all of these platforms. My biggest thing is to educate and inform Canadians as to what's causing all of the issues across our country, and the issues vary from region to region, but all of the issues are related to what I call as the head of the snake, the UN and the Sustainable Development Agenda, Agenda 21, 2030. So, my whole focus for the last 2 years is educating and informing people as to why all of these things are happening and how they're related to that overall agenda.
Wow, that's really fascinating, and so definitely a lot to unpack there. But just speaking for myself, I really didn't get into politics until recently, and I'm sure there's people listening as well who don't know that much about Canadian politics. I mean, I know Trudeau is your prime minister, as I understand, and he is quite divisive, quite polarizing, and I would guess that you are not a fan of him, Mark. But if you want to just explain the Yellow Vest movement too, because I know there was a similar movement in France, so just so people don't get confused.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So I'll start with Trudeau. It actually frustrates me that Canadians are so hyper focused on Trudeau. Now, of course, he's the face, he's the head, he's the puppet, of the day in Canada since 2015, really. But he is just that. He's just a puppet, and he's just, every decision that his government has made, every policy they've created, every law that they've enacted, is in commitment to the Sustainable Development Agenda. Every single thing he's done is in commitment to the UN and to the globalist agenda. And so it does frustrate me a little bit that there's so many people, even on the right, the conservative supporters, that they hyper focus on Trudeau, and we just need to get Trudeau out. It doesn't matter what establishment party, what establishment prime minister we have. If they're coming from the establishment and they're committed to this agenda, and so it's much bigger than than just Justin Trudeau. Of course, he's the face, and you know, I think he's actually, in a weird way, a bit of a blessing in disguise, because he doesn't hide what he's doing. He doesn't hide his agenda, and if a core group of Canadians are going to be motivated to take action, he's the kind of guy we need to inspire that action. I know that's kind of weird to say, but you know, again, it doesn't matter if it's Trudeau or if it's Andrew Scheer, leader of the Conservative Party, or it's the leader of the NDP, or it's the leader of the Green Party. All four of those establishment parties have sold out 100% to the Sustainable Development Agenda. So, it's a bigger problem than just one puppet. And as far as the Yellow Vests, so I mean, France started their Yellow Vest movement based on a gas tax. That was really the spark that inflamed that movement. And so in Canada, there was two issues that came about relatively close in timing, and that was for us the carbon tax and immigration. There was the migration pact that the UN has been promoting, and that Trudeau signed us on to. And so those two things essentially sparked a movement and within the Yellow Vests. And I would suggest the movement was probably stronger in the west part of Canada versus the east. Western Canada is much more sort of free market, much more right wing, um, uh, heavily is supported by the energy industry. That's a big driver of our economy here in the West. And we have something called equalization in Canada. It's an equalization formula, which essentially means the richer provinces have to support the poorer provinces and literally take billions from the province of Alberta and Saskatchewan, who are both oil provinces. And we give literally billions annually to provinces like Quebec and some maritime provinces and Ontario up until the last couple of years. And so it's extremely unfair that we have to carry the water for these folks out east. So there is a divide there. There's no getting around it. And I think so. A lot of that movement, that Yellow Vest movement, I think was more heavily supported in the West than it was in the East. But ultimately, what I tried to do within that movement is educate even people in that movement that it's not just about carbon tax. It's not just about the migrant pact, and then it's not just about our energy industry. All of these things are byproducts of globalism. They're byproducts of the greater UN and globalist agenda. So it's. I understand people's motivation or inspiration to fight back based on singular issues, but people need to understand that, while we're suffering based on these couple issues here in the West, the East is going to be suffering from other issues. It crosses all regions and all provinces throughout our country, and really throughout the Western world. And we're seeing this in the States. Of course, in the States, they sort of rebranded it the New Green Deal. And the deep state, as it relates to America. But it's the same thing. It's the same overall agenda of the globalists. And it's happening throughout the Western world. I mean, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, numerous countries throughout Europe. And some countries are finally stepping up. And some countries are, I think, inspired a lot by Donald Trump. But also, I think, there's some organic movements throughout Europe. You look at Hungary, you look at Poland, Italy's now getting into the nationalist populist game. The UK with Brexit. People are starting to wake up to it, and I really think that the globalists, with this whole Wu flu pandemic or plandemic, have really jumped on that whole thing. Whether or not that thing was orchestrated from inception, or they just jumped on the fact that it's happening, so they're going to take advantage of it. I think they're really pushing, and it's really a race now between nation states and the nationalist populist folks and the globalists. It's really a race to the finish to see how many goals they can achieve versus how many we're going to fight back against.
What was the money to the East used for? Do you know?
Well, so the formula is created again. It's redistribution of wealth, right? It's like we're seeing on the global stage, except it's just within our country. And so, for example, Alberta, that's their primary industry is energy. It's oil and gas, and they do well, and they've done well for years. Whereas a province like Quebec, who's heavily populated, and Ontario and Quebec essentially dictate who's going to run our country as far as politically, just because of population. And so what happens is you have Ottawa, you have the government that panders to provinces like Quebec, who have their own resources. They're resource rich, but they won't exploit those resources. They won't tap into those resources because we're paying their bills essentially. And of course, Ottawa panders to these two provinces because of sorry, I had a call I had to deny. So you still got me there?
Yeah, you're good. Sorry, my mic. I mute my mic when I'm not talking. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Pick up where you left off, please.
All right, cool. Yeah, so we have two vote-rich provinces, Ontario and Quebec, that in Ontario used to be very well known for its manufacturing and its mining and a little bit of logging. Well, they've essentially shut down all those industries over the last 20, 30 years. And so Ontario has become sort of a have-not province for a lot of years. Quebec has a lot of its own resources it doesn't tap into. So they depend, because of what the government has structured through equalization, they depend on provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, who are resource rich, and we essentially pay their bills for them. And it's literally billions annually that we send these provinces. And basically what we're saying, and what we said in the People's Party that I was in, is we need to get rid of this whole equalization formula and make it fair. I mean, there's no reason why. And I mean, with the downturn that we've seen in the energy industry alone, why is it that we're still paying those other provinces billions annually when we can barely make it doing what we're doing?
And you mentioned Trump. Do you think that Trump is owned by this cabal or a different group, or do you think he's independent as he says?
I think he's in a tough spot. Like, I think, if you listen to his speeches, especially during the campaign before the election, and then his speeches at the UN, I truly believe he represents, a nationalist America first view. I do believe that. I think though that the swamp in the States is so deep and so vast that I don't think he can achieve the things that he wants to achieve as quickly as we all want him to achieve it. And I say we because, as a Canadian, I understand how important it is that the U.S. leads the way. They've led the way of freedom for a very long time, and they're sort of they're the port in the storm that everyone sort of looks to lead the way, especially when you're talking about nationalism, populism, and looking after the nation state. So I think I think there's a lot of influences, and the swamp is deep in the state. So I think he struggles to do what he would like to do, versus what he's actually able to do. And I think we're seeing some things now with the whole Flynn thing and Obamagate. I think some of these things are starting to fall down. And you know, I'm pretty convinced Trump will get
Looks like Mark.
elected again, and I
Yep.
think he'll be able to do a lot more in his next term.
Yep. I agree. I don't know if we lost you there, Mark. Can you hear us? I no longer have any faith in Trump, Futter says. Rock Girl says, sheesh, I'm from Western Canada, and it's true. The Francos have run this country and stole so much from the West. Could you define what a Franco is, Rock Girl? 10 billion to Quebec. That is ridiculous. Futter18 says, I no longer have any faith in Trump. Quadrex, shout out to Quadrex for checking in with us. We are live with Mark from the Grizzly Patriot in Canada. And looks like we got Mark back. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I had another call that I should have put my phone on private.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Pick
Yeah,
up
I can
where
still do
you
that.
left off if you can remember. Otherwise, I can give you some.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I cut out, but
Okay,
essentially I
that's
said that
fine.
Trump's, you know, basically struggling to get
Oh yeah,
everything he
Trump.
wants done.
Mhm.
But I think if he gets elected, and I think he will get elected again, he'll be able to do a lot more in his next term.
Yeah, I agree. I do think he's pretty much going to get elected too. I don't see how anyone else is going to really challenge him at this point. The gun ban that showed up, is that something that is actually said and done, or can you speak on that? Because I just saw that Trudeau is trying to just remove guns from the country, it seems.
Yeah, so basically, again, another issue relative to the UN and the globalists and their disarmament agreement, small arms disarmament. So he's just fulfilling another agenda item given to him, dictated to him by the UN. But yeah, so basically he's taken advantage of the rights that were afforded him and the government through this whole flu pandemic, and through an order in council, which means this regulation that he's come up with didn't go through legislation, didn't go through any debate, didn't live up to any scrutiny whatsoever. It was an order in council, which basically makes him a dictator. And he came out and essentially put in regulations basically banning 1,500 different types, and in their words, assault weapons, assault style weapons. And yeah, so basically anything semi-automatic has essentially been banned, other than a few guns that, for whatever reason, didn't make his list. But it's just, it's the top of the slippery slope, and it's just a matter of time. I mean, even including in that, they added on shotguns, certain shotguns that ended up on this ban list, which is insane, of course. But I mean, it's all insane. It's all ridiculous. But he just went ahead and did it.
So we
And
got this comment
yeah,
from someone in your country. She says, I'm from Western Canada, and it's true. The Francos have run this country and stole so much from the West. Do you want to comment on that? I think she said Francophone is what she means by that. I clarified.
yeah, it's the French. I mean, Canada was basically from the start bilingual. So we had the French in Quebec, and we had English in the rest of Canada, and that's essentially the way it's been for 150 years, if not longer. And it's very vote rich for our politicians. So our politicians pander very extremely much to the French and to the Quebecois. Um, and it's really, of course, frustrating for the rest of English Canada and of course Western Canada, because we always get the short end of the stick because we don't have the voting bloc to sort of fight back against that. And Quebec has threatened separation for as long as I've been alive. It's been an issue. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not even the French people. It's not even the folks in Quebec necessarily. It's all driven by politics. it's the provincial politicians in Quebec that hold the rest of Canada hostage and the government hostage because it's vote rich and because our governments need their votes to get elected. Um, so it's the politicians that drive this divide more than anything. Quebecers just want to live like Quebecers. They want to maintain their culture, and that's all fine. But when you throw the political situation into it, then that completely divides our country between English and French. But it's a story as long as our country's been alive. So, uh, ultimately, what I've said and what we said in the People's Party is, we have to stop this pandering. Listen, Quebec, we respect your right to be, sort of an autonomous province, like we would respect the rest of the provinces to be autonomous, make their own decisions, protect their own, regional cultures and ways of life. That's all fine and good. But this whole idea that the West has to pick up their tab is not on, and it needs to change. And Quebec will threaten to separate. Go ahead. At the end of the day, if you're not happy, then there's the door, and we look forward to negotiating your survival once you're gone, because they wouldn't be able to survive without us. They know that. We know that. It's just the game that the politicians play.
And that's it's kind of funny there, Mark. I like that take, but this is something I don't think Americans know. And I am not entirely sure on it either. Are Canadians subject to the Queen?
Yeah, ultimately, this could be a long answer, but and it deserves a long answer, but I'll try to be short. So, we've never really separated ourselves from the Queen or from the UK. Um, Politicians like to claim that we have independence, but ultimately, you know, as opposed to what the United States did, the United States actually had a rebellion or revolution, and they wanted their freedom, and they expressed that through the gun, and they won, and the rest is history. Independence for the USA. Whereas Canada, we never really fought for our independence. It was sort of given to us by the UK, but still under the thumb of the UK. And even to this day, there's heavy influence that comes from the Queen. Uh, we have what's called a Governor General, and that's ultimately the individual that they call it ceremonial, but if it's just ceremonial, what the hell do we need it for? So she signs, that individual, who happens to be a she at this point, she signs all legislation. All legislation ends at her desk, right? So she signs on behalf of the Queen. And even if you're in the military, or you're in police force, or some other profession where you need to take an oath, you take an oath to the Queen. And so, again, most people just consider that to be ceremonial, but there is more influence there than what's being advertised.
Yeah, I agree, and it's something people here in the States don't really understand, because Americans just don't really think that much about other countries in general. Unfortunately, I think because of how our history is taught. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's ridiculous. The United Kingdom it's just something that we didn't realize, and I didn't realize that it's a proper monarchy, and they have real power, and
right.
they have a lot of power. So
Yeah,
that's something that
absolutely.
I don't think young people understand fully. So even Canadians are subject to it, even if it is separated by an ocean. But I want to ask about your jobs you've had in the past, if that's okay, Mark. And then if you
Sure.
do this full time, and then how long you've been doing it for. We got about 5 minutes left, so we can just wrap up after that if you want to dovetail
Yeah,
that
sure.
into any concluding thoughts.
Yeah. So I was a corrections officer, prison guard for 25 years. I started when I was 19, and I retired when I was 44. I retired because 25 years in prison was more than enough. And I was able to retire sort of at a young age because I started my own business. which is a tree service business here in Saskatoon. So that got to the point where I was able to, finally retire from corrections and get out of that gig and do, tree service full time. So that's basically that's what feeds the family and puts a roof over our head. So, my activities politically and my YouTube and all these things, that doesn't generate revenue. So that doesn't put food on the table. However, that's what seems to take most of my time and energy, of course, while still trying to run a business.
Wow, that's really cool. And it's something, yeah, I think people don't realize either, is most YouTubers don't support themselves via YouTube. It's just not possible, especially nowadays. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for chatting with me today, Mark. And I will put your YouTube channel in the description box below, and that'll be Grizzly Patriot. Mark broadcasts frequently from his YouTube channel, daily, I would say. Is that correct, Mark? Almost daily.
Almost daily. It's lately it's been a little more sporadic just because I'm so busy with my business throughout the day. I try to get in, a quick live or whatever during the day if I can. And then by the time I get home in the evening, I'm pretty bushed. So it hasn't been daily as it was a couple months ago, but it's still regular. It's still, every couple of days I'll get something on there. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for chatting, Mark. And I would love to chat again for a longer period of time, especially talking about your time as a correctional officer. I'm sure you have some cool stories there. But until next time,
I have a treasure trove.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Just let me know. And again, if anybody wants to check Mark's work out, I will put it in the description box below, as well as his social media links. Thanks again, Mark, and until next time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Take care.